Hold fire. The two words that changed history. Those were the words nobody expected to hear in a room built for certainty. Not because the people inside were reckless, not because they were eager, but because the entire design of that night, every console light, every checklist, every clipped phrase over the headset was meant to narrow doubt until it disappeared. And yet doubt didn't disappear. It showed up anyway, like a thin crack in a dam, and two words, hold fire, kept that crack from becoming a flood. Tonight, we're opening a near-miss file that isn't about superheroes or villains. It's about minutes. It's about a warning that looked real enough to move systems and people into motion, and about a chain of command that expects compliance but sometimes, in the narrowest sliver of time, depends on refusal. You'll hear how a single alert can turn trained professionals into the most dangerous kind of human, the kind who believes they don't have time to question. You'll also hear how, in one quiet decision, a person chose to slow the machine down. And if you've ever wondered how close the world can get to a point of no return without anyone outside a control room noticing, stay with me, because the scariest part of this file is how ordinary it begins. The room was not dramatic. That's the first thing people get wrong. They imagine a bunker with sirens and red strobe lights and someone yelling, "We're under attack." They imagine movie chaos, running boots, maps on walls, a general slamming a fist on a table. Reality, according to later recollections and after-action reviews, is more procedural than cinematic. Fluorescent light, the hum of ventilation, a clock that is always visible, chairs that squeak, coffee that's been on the hot plate too long, and the constant discipline of routine, because routine is what makes you reliable when you're tired, when you're stressed, when you're human. It was a late shift, the kind of shift where the outside world is asleep and your sense of time gets weird. You measure it in handovers, in scheduled checks, in the rhythm of status reports. A small team was on watch, and every person in that room knew the weight of what they were monitoring, not in a dramatic, chest-thumping way, but in the way you know the weight of a car you're driving on ice. You don't talk about it constantly. You just keep your hands steady and your eyes forward. In the center of that steadiness was a console with numbers that mattered. Not just numbers as data, but numbers as decisions. The system was built to detect patterns, to compare feeds, to raise the flag if something looked like a launch, an incoming strike, a sequence that shouldn't exist. On paper, it was a net. In practice, it was a net held by human hands, and human hands can misread a tug on the rope. When the first alert came in, it didn't arrive as fear. It arrived as a tone. A beep, a change in display, a line of text shifting from normal status to something that makes your spine tighten. There are certain sounds your body learns to respect. Fire alarms, a car horn too close, your name said sharply. This tone was one of those. The operator's eyes snapped to the screen. The room, which had been quiet in the tired way of midnight professionalism, became quiet in a different way, like a theater right before the curtain rises. At first it looked like a single event, a possible detection, a track. That was the language of it. Possible, detected, track, confidence. The system didn't say doom, it said indication, but everyone in that room understood what an indication could become once it reached the wrong level of certainty. The operator followed training, not panic training, trained training. Hands moving in a sequence that had been practiced so many times it had a physical feel, like playing a scale on a piano. Verify, cross-check, confirm with secondary sources, trigger the internal notification protocol. The first report was sent upward. The chain of command began to wake. In a near miss like this, the chain is not just hierarchy, it's time. Each rung you climb is a minute that passes. Each minute changes the options on the table. And here is the truth that makes people uncomfortable. The systems are built on the assumption that time is your enemy. That assumption pushes every person to act faster than their doubts. The room's supervisor leaned in, a second set of eyes, a third. They watched the track data update. The software refined its estimate, plotted a path, marked a timeline. A line appeared, the kind of line that makes a human brain want to complete a story. The brain hates uncertainty. Give it a line, and it will draw a conclusion with the confidence of a lie detector. Someone asked, "Any corroboration?" The operator toggled to another feed. A radar track should match. A second sensor should see it. A third should align. If the world is truly changing in the worst possible way, it should echo across systems like thunder. But the echo didn't come. Not immediately. The screen showed one strong signal and a lot of silence. Silence can mean two opposite things. It can mean nothing is happening, or it can mean you're blind. The supervisor didn't raise their voice. They didn't need to. The room could feel the shift in stakes. A call went out to another watch station, another console, another set of monitors. This is where the near miss begins to tighten. You're waiting for confirmation, while the system keeps insisting that the first signal is real. The machine doesn't feel embarrassment. It doesn't fear being wrong. It keeps updating, and every update looks like momentum. The second alert came in a minute later, not from the same channel, not from the same sensor, but from the system's own internal logic. Escalation. Confidence rising, the track holding, the timeline shortening. Somewhere up the chain, a phone rang. Then another. Someone sat up in bed. Someone's hand fumbled for a secure line. Someone started pulling on a uniform they'd hoped to sleep in until morning. In the control room, the operator's mouth went dry. They kept working. That's what training is for, to give you motion when your mind wants to freeze. Another cross-check, another query, another look at the track. Still no solid corroboration from independent sources. Still, the main system insisted. Still, the timer ticked down. And then a phrase arrived over a headset that changes the air in a room. The kind of phrase you never want to hear in a place like this. Report your assessment. Not what do you see, but what do you think? The moment someone asks for assessment, the technical becomes moral. It becomes your name attached to a judgment that could reshape the planet. The operator spoke carefully. We have a high confidence detection on primary. Secondary confirmation is pending. The words sounded composed, but inside the operator's head there was a storm. Pending is a dangerous word when you're measuring in minutes. Pending is what happens right before the wrong decision, when the world demands an answer you don't have. Up the chain, another voice. Controlled, clipped, the kind of voice that expects compliance because it has lived a career where compliance keeps order. Is it real? This is where the story everyone expects you to tell would go straight into either panic or heroics. But this story, this file, doesn't. It goes into hesitation. Because the operator didn't answer immediately. They looked at the screen, then at another screen, then at the supervisor. The supervisor looked back, and in that look there was something that doesn't exist in the manuals: permission to be human. The operator said, "We cannot confirm with independent sources at this time." That sentence is not flashy. It doesn't sound like a movie line, but it is the first pebble that can stop an avalanche. If you've ever been in a room where everyone is leaning toward a conclusion because it's easier than uncertainty, you know how hard it is to drop that pebble. On the other end of the line, silence. Silence in secure communications is never comfortable. It's someone deciding whether they trust you. It's someone weighing their own fear against your caution. The chain of command is built to reduce individual judgment, to make decisions predictable. And yet, when your data is uncertain, predictability can be lethal. The system in the room kept escalating. Another update. The projected timeline shortened again. The software displayed a window, an interval, when, if the track was real, decisions would need to be made. Not because anyone wanted to, but because the world of deterrence is built on the logic of response. Deterrence is a strange concept. It is peace built out of the promise of disaster. It depends on credibility, on the belief that if you are attacked, you will respond. And credibility, in practice, is managed by procedures that remove hesitation. That's why this file matters, because sometimes hesitation is the only thing standing between credibility and catastrophe. In the room, someone, another analyst, pulled up environmental data. Another looked for known anomalies, solar activity, sensor calibration logs, anything that could explain a false indication. This isn't about making excuses. It's about finding reasons not to gamble on the end of the world. A technician said, "Primary source is space-based. Space-based sensors are powerful, but they can also be fooled by the brightest trick in nature: reflected light, a cloud edge, a high-altitude phenomenon, a glint. The physics doesn't care what you fear, it only cares what light does." The operator swallowed and said, "If it's a false positive, it could be..." They stopped, because to say false positive out loud feels like arguing with the machine, and right now the machine looked convincing. Somewhere above them, the chain of command was climbing into a different room, a briefing room, a decision room, a place where the stakes were described in terms that make people sweat through their shirts. People arrived, not all at once, but in waves, each one taking a seat, each one looking at a display, each one asking the same question in different words. Are we sure? The answer still was no. And this is where the most dangerous pressure arrives. It's not the pressure to launch, it's the pressure to not be wrong about not launching. Because if the threat is real and you hesitate, you might lose the ability to respond. That fear is the fuel inside the deterrence machine. It burns in the background of every decision, making do something feel safer than wait. In the control room, the supervisor received a message from above: prepare to escalate. That message didn't mean press a button. It meant move to the next stage. It meant make sure your reports are clean. It meant be ready to support a decision. The operator's hands tightened on the console edge. And then, on a different screen, something flickered. A new feed, one that had been stubbornly silent, showed a single blip. Not a clear track, not a confident confirmation, but a hint. A hint is the worst possible thing at the worst possible time. A hint can be interpreted as validation by anyone who wants the anxiety to end. A hint can push a decision forward. A hint can turn a maybe into a probably. Someone in the room said that could be it. The operator stared. The supervisor stared. The analyst stared. The hint didn't behave like a real confirmation. It didn't match the projected trajectory cleanly. It didn't line up with the timeline the software insisted was correct. It was off. The operator felt a thought rise up, sharp and unwelcome. What if the system is fitting noise into a story? Humans do that. We see faces in clouds. We see patterns in random dots. We see meaning where there is only coincidence. Machines don't see meaning, but they can still be trained to treat certain shapes as signals. And if the environment throws a weird shape at the sensor, the machine will do what it was built to do: interpret. The operator spoke again over the secure line. We have partial secondary indications, but they are inconsistent with the primary track. In the decision room above, someone exhaled, someone leaned back, someone leaned forward. The inconsistency was a lifeline, if anyone was willing to grab it. And this is where the two words were spoken. Not shouted, not dramatic, just said. Hold fire. It didn't come with poetry. It came with authority. It came with a command that in that moment resisted the momentum of the system and forced a pause. It didn't mean ignore. It didn't mean stand down forever. It meant stop escalating into irreversible steps until you have what you need: confirmation. Hold fire, the two words that changed history. Those words did two things at once. They protected the world from a response to an uncertain signal, and they protected the chain of command from itself. Because once you start moving down a path in a crisis, the path becomes hard to abandon. The mind begins to justify. The group begins to reinforce. The machine begins to feel like it's driving you. But the words created a break. In the control room, the operator's shoulders dropped a fraction. Not relief yet, but space. Space to keep checking without feeling like every second was pushing them toward a cliff. The supervisor looked at the analyst and said, "Find the anomaly." That became the new mission. Not confirm the attack, but explain the signal. That shift in framing is subtle, and it is everything. If you frame a problem as prove it's real, you look for evidence that it's real. If you frame it as explain why it looks real, you look for the cracks. The team worked. They reviewed sensor logs. They compared timestamps. They looked at environmental conditions. They checked calibration flags. They searched for known issues in that sensor's history. In a later review of events like this, because near-miss files tend to share anatomy, analysts often note that the most dangerous period is when the system is confident, but the humans are not. That mismatch is where panic hides. Because confidence demands action, and uncertainty demands caution, and both are screaming at you in different languages. Minutes passed. The initial track did not develop the way it should have. The expected confirmations didn't arrive. The timeline, which had seemed so urgent, started to feel wrong. Not just uncertain, wrong. The operator noticed something, a timing discrepancy, a slight misalignment between the primary sensor's timestamp and the secondary system's clock. In a normal day, that would be a technical note. In this moment, it was a clue that could save millions. The technician said, if the primary clock drifted, the supervisor said, then the track projection is off. That mattered, because projection is what makes a signal feel real. Projection turns, we saw something, into, this is where it's going. If the projection is wrong, the confidence is a costume. They dug deeper, a maintenance entry, a recent software update, a brief calibration cycle, something that could create a phantom. Somewhere above them, the decision room kept asking for updates, and each update sounded a little less like the end of the world and a little more like a technical mystery. That's the best outcome in a moment like this, to turn apocalypse into troubleshooting. Then finally, the confirmation that mattered arrived, not as a positive but as an absence. Independent systems, the ones that would have no reason to miss something that large, showed nothing. No consistent track, no matching signatures, no corroboration. The threat, as initially described by the primary sensor, was not behaving like reality. The chain of command made the call to de-escalate. In the control room, nobody cheered. That's the second thing people get wrong. They imagine a celebration, but the people who do this kind of work don't celebrate. They go quiet. They feel the delayed impact. They feel the tremor of what could have happened. They think about how close the machine came to pulling them along. They think about how easy it would have been for someone to interpret that hint as confirmation, for someone to say, we can't risk waiting, for someone to turn uncertainty into action. After the de-escalation, the room didn't instantly become normal. It stayed tense, as if the air itself needed time to believe the danger had passed. Someone finally let out a breath they didn't know they were holding. Someone rubbed their forehead. Someone stared at the console and realized their hands were shaking. Hold fire. The two words that changed history, and the scary part is this. They only mattered because there was a history to change. A machine of procedure, a pressure of doctrine, a human need to be certain. Later the investigation began. Every near miss like this becomes a lesson if the institution is healthy enough to learn. The first question is always, what happened? The second question is harder. Why did it almost happen? Because the signal wasn't the real threat. The real threat was the gap between machine confidence and human certainty, and the way that gap can be bridged with fear. The review team collected logs. They interviewed the watchstanders. They checked the sensor's status. They reviewed the communications. They looked at the decision timeline and asked minute by minute why certain choices were made. In their language, they'd call it decision latency. In human language, it's the time it takes to either panic or pause. One finding in scenarios like this is that systems designed to reduce false negatives, missing a real attack, often increase false positives, seeing an attack that isn't there. That's not a bug. It's a trade. It's a trade you make when the consequence of missing something feels unacceptable. But when you make that trade, you need something else to protect you: human skepticism and robust cross-confirmation. If you're listening and thinking, okay, but why wasn't it just automatically filtered out? That's the wrong comfort, because no filter is perfect. Filters are built by people, and the world is not obligated to behave like your model. Nature can mimic. Technology can drift. A software update can do something unexpected. A rare alignment of conditions can create a signal that looks like a threat. You can build a system that is excellent and still have a night where excellence produces danger. In the interviews, the operator described the moment of the first alert as surreal, not terrifying in a screaming way, but in a detached way, like their mind split into two, one part reciting procedure, the other part whispering, "This can't be happening." That whisper is important. It's not weakness, it's a reality check trying to survive inside a system that rewards certainty. The supervisor described the hardest moment as the second alert, when the system escalated confidence without independent corroboration. That's the moment when a machine can become persuasive. Not because it's smarter than you, but because it's relentless. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't get embarrassed. It keeps insisting. And if you're a human who is tired, who is afraid, who is trained to trust the system, the machine's insistence can feel like truth. In the decision room, a senior figure described the two words, "hold fire," as the simplest order I've ever given and the hardest. Because in deterrence logic, hesitation can be framed as weakness, and nobody wants to be responsible for weakness when the stakes are existential. That's the trap. The trap is not evil. The trap is reputation. The trap is doctrine. The trap is the fear of being wrong in the direction that looks passive. So why did they say it? Why did someone, in the middle of a rising alert, choose to press the brake? Because there was no confirmation. And because someone remembered that action without certainty is not strength, it's gambling. That person, whoever they were in your mind's reconstruction, did not rely on courage alone. They relied on process, on the idea that escalation must be justified by multiple independent sources, on the principle that a single sensor does not get to decide the fate of the world. And that principle only works if a human enforces it when the pressure is highest. Old fire, the two words that changed history. Say them out loud and they sound simple, but behind them are a dozen choices that had to be made correctly. The operator reporting uncertainty instead of exaggerating confidence, the supervisor backing that report instead of demanding a cleaner narrative, the analysts looking for anomalies instead of forcing confirmation, the chain of command accepting doubt as data instead of treating it as insubordination. Now, I want to pause here and ask you something, because it matters for how we read stories like this. When you hear about a near miss, do you imagine the hero as someone who breaks rules, or someone who follows the right rules at the right time? Drop a comment with which one you think it is, because in these files, the most world-saving behavior is often the least cinematic. It's adherence to verification when fear is pushing you to skip steps. After the investigation, the system was adjusted, not rewritten from scratch, but tightened, thresholds reviewed, cross-confirmation protocols emphasized, training updated with this case as an example. In many institutions, near misses become the stories told to new watchstanders, not to scare them, but to remind them that the machine is not a god. The machine is a tool, and tools can cut the wrong thing if you swing them without looking. The operator returned to work. That's another quiet truth. People think that after a night like that, you quit, you collapse, you never recover. Sometimes you do, but often you go back the next day, and the consoles look the same, and the coffee tastes the same, and the fluorescent lights hum the same, and you sit down and you do your job. Only now you carry the knowledge that you lived through a moment the world never knew about. And that knowledge changes you. It changes how you hear tones. It changes how you look at a line on a screen. It changes how you trust your own gut when the machine insists. It changes how you think about the words, probably a glitch. Because the truth is, the world has been saved more times than we can count by people who said, "Not yet. Show me more." Hold fire. The two words that changed history, and if you take nothing else from this file, take this. The most dangerous thing in a high-stakes system is a story that becomes too tidy, too quickly. The mind wants clean answers. The machine can produce clean answers. But the real world is messy, and the only way to survive mess is to respect uncertainty instead of rushing to silence it. There's a darker angle to this, and we should say it plainly. Near misses like this do not prove the system is safe. They prove the system is survivable. Sometimes. They prove that humans can interrupt momentum. Sometimes. They prove that the difference between disaster and normal morning can be a handful of minutes and a few sentences spoken by tired people under fluorescent lights. If that makes you uneasy, it should. Unease is appropriate here, not panic, not despair, just the sober recognition that complex systems fail in complex ways, and that safety is not a guarantee, it's work. So what happened to the signal? In this reconstruction, based on patterns common to near-miss reviews, the final conclusion was a combination of environmental conditions and technical timing. A rare alignment of reflected light, a sensor interpretation error, and a clock discrepancy that created a phantom track. Once the clocks were reconciled and the environmental data was understood, the signal collapsed into noise. The attack vanished not because someone shot it down, but because it had never existed. That should be comforting, and it should also be terrifying. Comforting because the world was not under attack that night. Terrifying because the system believed it was long enough to matter. If you're still here, type "hold" in the comments, not as a slogan, but as a marker that you made it to the point where the file stops being a story and becomes a lesson. And here's the lesson we don't say enough. The chain of command is not just a ladder. It's a filter. It should filter panic out. It should filter assumptions out. It should filter single-source certainty out. When it doesn't, the ladder becomes a slide. Now, before we close, let's talk about the human who said it. Hold fire. The two words that changed history. People always want a name, a face, a biography. They want a singular hero because a singular hero is easier than a systemic lesson. But what actually saves the world is usually a network of decisions. One person says, "We can't confirm." Another says, "Keep checking." Another says, "Don't escalate without corroboration." Another says, "Hold." Another accepts that order instead of pushing back. It's a chain of restraint. And restraint is underrated. Restraint is what you need when your tools are powerful. Restraint is what keeps confidence from becoming arrogance. Restraint is what makes verification possible. Restraint is what turns two words into a barrier against momentum. When the sun rose, people went to work, kids went to school, coffee was poured, traffic formed. Nobody felt the tremor that had passed through a room in the night. Nobody knew that. For a brief window, a machine had screamed and human beings had to decide whether to believe it. Nobody knew that the world had sat on the edge of a story it never entered, because someone refused to let uncertainty become action. Hold fire, the two words that changed history. And here's the final thought I want to leave you with. We tend to think history is shaped by big speeches and big battles and big decisions made in broad daylight. But sometimes history is shaped by a pause, by a person who says, "Wait," by a room that chooses not to rush, by a chain of command that accepts doubt long enough for truth to arrive. If you want the next file, here's what's coming. In the next episode of Nuclear Near-Miss Files, we'll open a case where the system didn't scream loudly, where it whispered, where the warning was ambiguous, and where the most dangerous moment wasn't an alarm, but a missing phone call at exactly the wrong time. It's a file about silence, miscommunication, and the terrifying speed of assumptions. If you want that one, comment "Next File," so I know to pull it from the archive.